The boardroom went quiet the moment I walked in. Not the respectful kind of quiet. Not the kind where people look up because someone important just entered the room. The other kind. The kind where people already know what's about to happen to you, and not one of them has the courage to warn you. I noticed it before I even reached my chair. The way Brandon Whitfield straightened his tie without looking at me. The way Diana Hargrove set her coffee cup down just a little too carefully. The way you set something down when you're trying not to look like you're waiting. The way Richard who had hired me 22 years ago, Richard who had once called me the backbone of this company at a Christmas dinner in front of 60 people, was looking at the table instead of the door. I had driven to that office the same way I had driven to it for 22 years, down Peachtree Road, left on West Paces Ferry, parking spot 14B, which had been mine since 2009. I had worn the navy suit, the one I bought the week I closed my first commercial deal, back when the tag said it cost more than I could comfortably afford, and I bought it anyway because my mother always said dress for the life you're building, not the one you're standing in. I had a coffee from the place on the corner. I had my badge. I had my calendar synced. I did not have any idea that by 9:47 that morning, 22 years would be placed in a folder and slid across a table toward me like a bill I had failed to pay. They had prepared a 47-page document about everything I had supposedly done wrong. They had a termination agreement with a number on it that I will tell you about, and when I tell you, you will understand exactly what they thought of me. They had a young man, 34 years old, sitting in that room ready to step into the position I had spent 2 decades building. A young man I had personally trained, whose first commercial contract I had walked him through line by line in my own office with my own red pen. And Richard Hargrove, the man who built this company partly on my back, looked me in the eye and used 5 words that I will never forget for as long as I live. I signed the paper they put in front of me. I stood up. I walked to the door, and in the glass of that door, just before it closed behind me, I caught my own reflection for one brief second. That was the last time I said nothing. My name is Maya Thompson. I am 63 years old. I was born and raised in Savannah, Georgia, the second of 4 daughters of Dorothy and James Thompson. My father was an electrician, not the kind who owns a company, the kind who gets up before sunrise and comes home after dark with calluses on both hands and doesn't complain about it because complaining doesn't rewire anything. He fixed what was broken in other people's houses and then came home and fixed things in ours and never once made us feel like we were a burden he was carrying. He was the quietest, strong person I have ever known, and I did not understand until I was much older how rare that is. My mother was a 3rd-grade teacher at Gadsden Elementary for 31 years. She taught children to read who did not believe they could. She sent home handwritten notes to parents not just when children misbehaved, but when they did something wonderful, because she said too many people only heard from school when something went wrong. She had a voice that could fill a room without raising itself, and she used that voice every morning when she stood behind me at the bathroom mirror and braided my hair before school. Baby, you walk in a room, you own it. Not because they gave it to you, because you built it. She said it the way other mothers say have a good day. Automatically, consistently, like a fact she was making sure I memorized before I needed it. I received a full scholarship to Spelman College in Atlanta in 1979. I was the first person in my family to go to a 4-year university. My mother ironed my clothes the night before I left and did not cry until she thought I was asleep. I heard her through the wall. I did not say anything because I understood she needed that moment to be hers. I studied business. I graduated in 1983. I spent 6 years working in commercial property management for 2 smaller firms, learning every part of the business from lease agreements to asset valuation to client relationships. I earned my broker's license in 1989. By 1995, I had a reputation in the Atlanta commercial real estate market as someone who could close deals that other people walked away from, not through pressure or performance, but because I did the work of understanding what both sides actually needed and finding the place where those things overlapped. In 1998, I married Raymond Thompson. He was a high school history teacher and the kindest man I have ever met in my life. He made me laugh every single day for 19 years. He used to leave handwritten notes in my coat pockets so I would find them in the morning. Never anything elaborate, just small things. Good luck with Callaway today. You already know more than everyone in that room. Or sometimes just, hi. That was it. Just hi. I have kept every one of them in a shoebox in my closet. I still look at them sometimes. Raymond died of pancreatic cancer in 2009. We had 11 months between the diagnosis and the end, and I will not spend time here describing those months, except to say that when you lose someone like that, the world does not stop. You still have a daughter to raise. You still have a mortgage. You still have a job to go to. And so you go. You carry what you're carrying, and you go. Our daughter Keisha was 17 when her father died. She is now 31 years old and a pediatric physician in Charlotte, North Carolina. She is brilliant and funny, and she got Raymond's eyes and my stubbornness in equal measure, which means she will be just fine for the rest of her life. I paid for her medical school by myself. I do not say that for credit. I say it because it is part of understanding who I was during those years, what I was working for, and how hard I was working for it. I joined Hargrove & Associates in 2001. The company had 12 employees. I was the first Black woman hired into a management position in the commercial properties division. I knew what that meant. I had been the first Black woman in a management position at the firm before them, too. You learn to carry that designation with a certain kind of careful attention, not because it defines your capability, but because people will watch you more closely for failure than they watch anyone else, and you do not have the luxury of being average. In my first year at Hargrove, my name was spelled wrong in the company-wide email directory for 6 months. Maya, not Maya. Maya. I corrected it once, directly and politely, to the office administrator. It was fixed for 2 weeks and then reverted. I corrected it again. After the 3rd time, I stopped correcting it and simply signed every email with my full name, clearly, so that anyone who read my work would know exactly how to spell it. I did not complain. I did the work. In 2005, I brought in the first contract over $4 million in the company's history. In 2009, the year the real estate market collapsed, the year Raymond died, the year I was driving to the hospital on Tuesday nights and closing deals on Wednesday mornings, my personal sales figures represented 31% of the company's total revenue. 31% from one person in the worst market year in a generation. In 2014, I was promoted to Senior Director of Commercial Properties. It had taken 13 years. I was good enough to be there in year 2, but I understand how these things work, and I accepted the timeline without bitterness, because bitterness is expensive, and I had other things to spend my energy on. In 2019, an EVP position opened at Hargrove. The Internal Evaluation Committee recommended me unanimously. I knew this because Terry Nakamura, the executive assistant who had worked with me for 7 years, told me quietly on a Thursday afternoon. The position was given to a 41-year-old man named Daniel Forsyth, who had been recruited from a firm in Dallas. He lasted 14 months before leaving for another opportunity. During those 14 months, I trained him on the Atlanta market. I did not complain. I did the work. There is one more person you need to know before I take you into that boardroom. Loretta James, 61 years old. We met freshman year at Spelman. She sat next to me in an economics class and leaned over on the first day to whisper, "I don't understand a single word this man is saying, do you?" I whispered back. "Not one word. And we have been friends for 44 years. Loretta taught high school English for 23 years and then left to open a hair salon in Stone Mountain called Loretta's, which is not a creative name but is exactly the kind of name Loretta would choose because she says, people already know it's good when they know I'm behind it. She is the person I call when I need to say the thing out loud before I decide what to do about it. She is the only person who knew the full story of what happened at Hargrove from the very first day to the very last. She is also the person who showed up at my door on the evening of June 28th with a small box and a bottle of champagne and said without being asked, "You're not wearing that navy suit." But I am getting ahead of myself. The meeting request arrived through Terry Nakamura at 8:10 in the morning. "Richard would like to see you at 9. Conference room 12. Formal attire. Conference room 12. That was the first signal. Conference room 12 was on the top floor. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown and a mahogany table that seated 18 and was only used for transactions. Significant ones. It was not a room where you discussed quarterly projections or reviewed personnel concerns. It was a room where things were signed and announced. I did not know what I was walking into. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. Not to make myself seem less perceptive, but because it speaks to exactly how thoroughly they had managed the information around me. I was not paranoid. I had no reason to be. In 22 years, I had never received a formal disciplinary notice. My performance reviews consistently ranked in the top 5% of the division. 3 months earlier, Richard had forwarded a client commendation to the entire leadership team with a personal note that said, "This is what we mean when we talk about the Hargrove Standard." 3 months. I went to conference room 12 at 9 o'clock. 18 chairs, 16 of them occupied. Richard at the head, Diana to his right. Diana, who had joined the company as CFO 5 years earlier after her own career in financial consulting, who managed the company's money with precision and managed her opinions about me with somewhat less precision, though she had always been professional enough to keep them in a register that I could not formally object to. She had her hands folded on the table, and she did not look at me when I walked in. Brandon Whitfield sat beside Diana. Brandon was 34. He had a master's degree from Emory and good shoes, and a talent for presenting other people's work as though he had generated it himself. I had spent 18 months teaching him how to read a commercial lease, how to assess risk in a multi-tenant development deal, how to build a relationship with a client over time rather than just in the moment of signature. He was not unintelligent, but he had not yet done the kind of work that earns a certain kind of confidence, and he compensated for that gap with a particular performance of confidence that I recognized very well because I had watched people perform it at my expense for 20 years. Terry Nakamura stood near the window with a tablet in her hands. She was the only person in the room who was standing. When I walked in, she looked at me for exactly 1 second and then looked out the window. That single second told me everything, though I did not yet know what exactly it was telling me. 6 board members completed the room. I knew all of their faces. I had been in meetings with all of them. 2 of them had at various points personally thanked me for work that had grown the company's portfolio. As I walked to the chair they had left for me, at the far end of the table, opposite Richard, the seat that puts the maximum possible distance between you and the person speaking, not one of them met my eyes. I sat down. I set my coffee on the table. I waited. Richard began the way I had seen him begin difficult conversations before, with warmth. A specific, performed warmth that was structurally indistinguishable from sincerity if you had not heard it enough times to recognize the shape of it. "Maya, before anything else, I want to say how much you have meant to this company. Your legacy here is real. There's not a person in this room who doesn't recognize what you've contributed." He used the word legacy twice in the first 90 seconds. When someone uses that word about you while you are still sitting in front of them, it is not a compliment. It is a tense. It means they are already speaking about you in the past. Diana reached forward and slid a folder across the table toward me. Not Richard. Diana. She did it smoothly, the way you do something you've rehearsed. And in the watching of that gesture, I understood something that would become important later. This was not Richard's meeting. Richard was the face of it. Diana had built it. I opened the folder. Performance and Compliance Review. Maya Thompson, 2019 through 2023. 47 pages, 11 numbered items. I read slowly. The room waited. I could hear the ventilation system and the distant sound of traffic through the glass and my own breathing. Some of the items were real events, restructured. Item 3. Failure to consult executive leadership before engaging Morrison Development in preliminary negotiations. I remembered those negotiations. I had sent Richard an email on a Tuesday morning describing the preliminary contact. He had replied the following Thursday with 2 words. Keep going. I had that email. I had kept it. The way I had kept all of them. The way you keep things when you have spent 20 years understanding that memory is not the same as documentation. Some of the items were things I did not recognize at all. Item 9. Repeated failure to follow established communication protocols with the Walton Street portfolio. I managed the Walton Street portfolio directly. I had never received a communication protocol document related to it. I had never been informed that one existed. Item 11. Pattern of insubordination towards senior leadership. No dates, no names, no incidents. Just the phrase, sitting there in 11-point Times New Roman, as though the accusation explained itself. I finished reading. I set the folder down with both hands flat on top of it. Richard began to speak again. Something about transitions. Something about the company's direction. I was listening, but I was also doing something else simultaneously. I was memorizing the room. Who was shifting in their chairs? Who was looking at the table? Who was looking at me? I was making a record of everything. The way my father used to take careful note of an electrical panel before he touched a single wire, because the note-taking was the safety. Then Brandon Whitfield opened his mouth. He leaned slightly forward, the way young men do when they want to seem engaged, and he said, "Maya, we feel like this transition could actually be a great opportunity for you. You've earned your rest. Your rest." The room did not laugh. No one laughed. But 3 people looked down simultaneously, and one person on the board, a man named Arthur, 60 years old, who had shaken my hand at a conference in 2018 and said he admired what I'd built, turned to look at the window. That was the sound I will remember. Not a laugh, not an objection, just the soft sound of people deciding to be somewhere else in their minds while they stayed in their bodies right there in that room. 22 years, 31% of total revenue in a collapse year. You've earned your rest, said by a 34-year-old man wearing the confidence I had helped him build. Richard set a single page in front of me, the termination agreement. The separation package was $47,000, just under 3 months of my actual salary, framed as generosity. In exchange, I would sign a non-disparagement clause and a full release of claims. I would have 48 hours to decide. And then Richard said it, the 5 words. He looked at me across that long mahogany table, in that room with its floor-to-ceiling glass and its perfect midtown view, and he said, "The company has outgrown you, Maya. Not the role has changed, not we're moving in a different direction, not even the already condescending you've earned your rest. The company has outgrown you." I looked at him. I want you to understand that when I describe what happened in my face in that moment, which was nothing visible, it was not because I felt nothing. It was because I had learned something over 63 years that took me a long time to learn. The most powerful response you can give to someone who expects you to break is to give them nothing to measure. He had expected something. I don't know exactly what. A protest, perhaps. A trembling chin. Tears, maybe, which he could have then described to others later as evidence of instability. Something to confirm the story in that folder. The story of a woman who had simply not been able to keep up. I gave him nothing. I picked up the pen. I signed the termination agreement. I stood up. I did not extend my hand for a handshake. I did not say thank you for the years. I did not say anything. I straightened the folder on the table in front of me, a small, precise gesture, the kind that means nothing and means everything. I picked up my coffee cup. I walked to the door. In the glass of that door, that floor-to-ceiling boardroom glass, I caught my own reflection for 1 second before the door swung shut behind me. Navy suit, chin level, eyes clear. That was the last time I said nothing. I did not call anyone. I drove home the same way I had driven to the office that morning. Down Peachtree, left on West Paces Ferry, onto the highway, exit 32. The same roads, the same hands on the wheel, the same coffee cup in the holder, though the coffee was cold now. The city looked exactly like it had looked at 7:30 in the morning when I had driven in the other direction. Nothing had changed in Atlanta, Georgia on that Thursday in March. The dogwoods were starting to come in along the highway median, those small white blooms that appear every year whether you are paying attention or not. I noticed them because I always noticed them. Raymond used to say the dogwoods were Atlanta's way of apologizing for February. I pulled into my driveway at 11:14 in the morning and sat in the car with the engine running. I did not know I was going to sit there for 20 minutes. I did not plan it. I was simply not ready to go inside yet, and I have learned over 63 years to respect that signal when my body sends it. The signal that says not yet. Stay here. Give yourself a moment. Raymond used to call it my decompression time. He said I was like a deep-sea diver who needed to come up slowly or the pressure change would hurt me. I thought about calling Keisha. I decided against it. Keisha was in the middle of a clinic day in Charlotte, and she would hear something in my voice, and she would worry, and there was nothing she could do from 250 miles away, and I did not want her worrying about something she could not fix. That is not protection. That is just information management. I would tell her when I had something useful to tell. I thought about calling Loretta. I decided against that, too, for different reasons. Loretta would come directly to my house. She would bring food and righteous fury in equal measure, and she would say things about Richard Hargrove that were probably accurate and definitely satisfying, and I was not ready for satisfaction yet. I was not ready for, "Can you believe they did that to you?" because I needed to be alone with the version of myself who was not a victim of what just happened, but a person deciding what to do about it. There is a difference. It is a small difference in the moment, and an enormous one over time. I turned off the engine. I went inside. I did not turn on the lights. I sat in the armchair in the living room, Raymond's chair, the green one that I have kept in the same corner since 2009, even though it no longer quite matches anything else in the room, and I set the folder on my lap. The 47-page performance review, the document that Diana Hargrove had spent what I estimated was several weeks constructing in order to make 22 years of my professional life look like a slow accumulation of inadequacy. I read it again, all 47 pages. This time not to feel it, but to understand it. There is a technique I learned from my father, who learned it from years of working with electrical systems that could hurt you if you approached them emotionally. He called it reading the board. Before you touch anything, you look at everything. You trace the lines. You find where the current is actually running versus where it's supposed to be running. You do not assume. You look. I read the board. And what I found, reading it the second time in my dark living room with the afternoon light coming through the curtain gap onto the rug, was not what Diana had intended me to find. She had intended me to find a record of failure. What I actually found was a map, because every false claim in that document pointed to a piece of documentation that directly contradicted it. Every fabricated incident was traceable. Every misrepresentation had a timestamp somewhere that told the real story. Item 7. Unauthorized negotiation with Delaney Properties. I had the email. September 14th, 2021. Richard's reply. Keep going. 2 words. Documented. Timestamped. Item 3. Failure to consult executive leadership on Morrison Development. I had 3 emails, a meeting summary, and a signed approval form. Item 11. Pattern of insubordination. No dates, no names, no incidents, which meant no evidence, which meant it was the weakest item in the folder and the most revealing, because you only include something that vague when you need to fill space, when the real case is thinner than you want it to appear. I set the folder on the coffee table. I leaned back in Raymond's chair. I looked at the ceiling. The anger was there. I want to be honest about that. I am not a person who transcends anger. I am a person who knows where to put it. The anger was present, and it was appropriate, and it was mine, and I let myself feel it fully in that dark living room, because I have learned that the only thing worse than feeling a hard emotion is pretending you don't have it. You don't outrun it. You metabolize it. You let it pass through you until what's left is something colder and more useful. What was left after the anger moved through was this: clarity. Not a plan yet. Not a strategy. Just a clear seeing of what was true. 22 years of work that was real, documented, and irreplaceable. A network of relationships I had built with my own hands and my own name. A reputation that existed independent of the Hargrove letterhead, because I had been careful over the years to make sure it did. Careful in ways I had never explained to anyone, for reasons I had not yet fully articulated even to myself, but which now, sitting in the dark, made a particular kind of sense. As if some part of me had known, long before I consciously admitted it, that this day was a possibility I needed to be ready for. The company has outgrown you, Maya. I turned the phrase over in my mind one more time, examined it the way my father examined a wiring diagram, not to feel the insult of it, but to understand the mechanics. What had Richard meant to accomplish with those words? He had meant to make me small, to make me feel that the problem was in me, not in the room, to send me away carrying the weight of that assessment, so that I would spend my energy on grief and self-doubt rather than on the question of what came next. It was, I recognized, a tactical move. And like most tactical moves made against people who are underestimated, it depended entirely on the target responding the way the attacker predicted. I had not cried yet. I want to tell you when I cried, because it matters. I cried at 2:30 in the afternoon, in the bathroom, alone, with the fan on. I cried for 11 minutes. I know because I looked at my watch when it started. Not deliberately, just the habit of a person who has structured her life in increments. And I looked again when I became aware that it was ending. 11 minutes. 22 years of a career. The memory of Raymond saying you already know more than everyone in that room. The 17-year-old version of Keisha, who used to fall asleep on my shoulder while I worked late at the kitchen table. The first day I walked into the Hargrove building and thought this is where I build something. 11 minutes. That was what I allowed myself. Then I washed my face. I looked in the mirror for a long time. Not vanity. Inventory. This is the face, I told myself. This is 63 years. This is everything that has already been survived. Look at it clearly. I went back to Raymond's chair. I sat down. I pulled a single piece of paper from the notepad on the side table, and I picked up a pen, and in the quiet of that house where I had raised a daughter and loved a man and built a life that no folder of 47 pages could accurately describe, I wrote 3 words. All right then. Not I'll show them. Not they'll pay for this. Not any of the dramatic declarations that make for satisfying stories, but do not actually describe how determined people begin. Just all right then. The words of someone who has finished grieving and started thinking. The words of someone who has accepted the shape of the situation and is now deciding what to do inside it. The most quietly powerful sentence I know, because it contains no performance, no audience, no bravado. Just a person, alone in a room, making a decision. I put the paper in the top drawer of the side table. I picked up my phone. I called Keisha's voicemail. I knew she'd be with Patience, and left her a message that said only, "Hi, baby. Just thinking about you. Call me when you have a minute." Then I made a cup of tea, and I started to work. What nobody at Hargrove and Associates knew, what I had never told Richard, never told Diana, never put in a report or mentioned in a meeting or referenced in any way that could be documented, was that for the past 5 years, I had been building something in parallel. Not a competing company. Not anything that violated my employment agreement. Something quieter than that, and more durable. Every time I completed a significant transaction at Hargrove, every major deal, every long-term lease, every client relationship that closed successfully, I wrote a handwritten note to the key person on the other side of that deal. Not an email, not a LinkedIn message, a handwritten note on plain cream stationery with a real stamp sent to their office address. I had started doing it because Raymond did it. He sent handwritten notes to parents after parent-teacher conferences. Not the difficult ones, the good ones. The ones where a parent came in worried about their child and left with something useful. He said, "Maya, people are so prepared to hear bad news that good news delivered in writing feels like a gift." So I adopted it. A small habit. 30 minutes every time a deal closed. 5 years. Approximately 12 significant transactions per year. 60 notes. 60 people who had a piece of paper with my name on it in their handwriting somewhere in their office or their files. 60 people who had worked with me directly, personally, not as a representative of a firm, but as Maya Thompson, a woman who followed through, who understood their needs, who took 30 minutes after the deal was done to say it was a pleasure to work alongside you. That is what I had. That was the inventory I sat down to count the week after I left Hargrove, working at a folding table in the back room of Loretta's salon in Stone Mountain, surrounded by the smell of leave-in conditioner and the sound of Shirley Caesar coming from the small Bluetooth speaker Loretta kept on the shelf between the styling products. Loretta had not asked why I needed the space. I had called her on a Friday morning and said, "Loretta, I need to borrow your back room for a few weeks." Folding table. Wi-Fi. No questions for now. She had said, "Coffee maker's already back there." That was the entire conversation. 44 years of friendship, and we had gotten very efficient. I made a list by hand, the way my father made his wiring diagrams. Everything visible, nothing assumed. 60 relationships. I evaluated each one honestly, without flattery and without false modesty, for the quality of the connection and the realistic possibility of future business. I circled 8. Of those 8, I put a star next to 3. One name had 2 stars. Gerald Washington, 67 years old, 3rd generation Atlanta, the largest private commercial real estate investor in the city, by some measures in the Southeast. He had built his portfolio over 40 years with a combination of patience, precision, and a refusal to work with people he did not personally trust. He did not give his business to the largest firm or the most prestigious firm. He gave it to people. I had worked with him on 2 transactions over the years. A mixed-use development on the west side in 2018 and a portfolio acquisition in 2021. Both had closed on time and on terms. After the 2021 closing, he had shaken my hand and said without preamble, "If you ever go independent, call me first." I had written it in my personal notebook that evening, not because I was planning anything, just because you write down the things that might matter later. On a Tuesday morning, 10 days after leaving Hargrove, I called Gerald Washington's direct line. He answered after 1 ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," he said. "I heard what they did. Atlanta is a city of 4 million people with a commercial real estate community of about 300. Information travels fast and specifically in small worlds, and I should not have been surprised that he knew, but I was, slightly. I heard what they did. Not I heard you left. I heard what they did. He had already assessed the situation. We met that Thursday at the Four Seasons on 14th Street. 8 in the morning. Gerald was already at the table when I arrived, which I respected. Punctuality is a form of respect, and he knew that I knew that. I did not ask for a job. I did not describe what had happened at Hargrove in emotional terms or ask for his sympathy or his validation. I set a 12-page document on the table between us and let him read it. I had written it over 3 nights at the folding table in Loretta's back room. It was an analysis of the Atlanta commercial real estate market for the next 18 months. Specific opportunities, specific risks, specific underserved segments, specific strategies. It was the kind of document that takes a particular combination of market knowledge, relationship awareness, and analytical discipline to produce. It was, without my saying so explicitly, a demonstration. Not a resume, a demonstration. Gerald read all 12 pages. He turned them slowly, the way a person reads when they're actually reading. He did not speak while he read. When he finished, he set the last page down, picked up his coffee, and was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How much do you need to start?" 4 words. Gerald Washington did not use more words than the situation required, and in 40 years of business, he had learned that the most efficient thing you can do for a person you believe in is remove the obstacle between them and the thing they're capable of building. I told him the number. He did not negotiate it. We shook hands. That was the first meeting of what would become, over the following 3 months, the founding partnership of Thompson Commercial Properties. I walked out of the Four Seasons into the March morning sun and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just standing, feeling the particular quality of air that surrounds a decision that cannot be undone. Not frightened, not elated, just clear, the way the sky is clear after a storm has fully passed. I called Loretta from the parking garage. "Well," she said. "He's in." A sound from Loretta that I can only describe as a controlled explosion of joy. I knew it. I knew it the minute you told me about that handshake in 2021. I said to myself, "Loretta, that man is going to matter. I told you, Loretta." "What? I need you to let me get in my car. Go. Call me later." The second week, I began to contact the other names on my list. 6 of them responded within 48 hours. Meetings were scheduled. Conversations happened. 2 of them, Robert Calloway of the Calloway Group and Patricia Osei of Osei Development Partners, expressed immediate interest in working with Thompson Commercial Properties once it was formally established. But Robert Calloway said something during our conversation that changed the temperature of everything. We were on the phone. He was describing a deal he had recently tried to bring to me through Hargrove, a logistics center acquisition on the South Side. I did not know about this deal. I had not heard of it. "That's strange," I said. "When did you reach out?" "Twice," he said. "January and February. They told me you were on medical leave." I was very still for a moment. "Robert, I was not on medical leave at any point this year." A pause. "Maya, I'm sorry. They were quite specific about it. They said you were dealing with a health situation and that Brandon Whitfield was handling your accounts in the interim." I thanked him. I told him I would follow up. I ended the call. Then I called the next person on my list, and the next, and the next. 5 of the 8 people I contacted had received the same story: medical leave, health situation, handling your accounts in the interim. Some variation of those words, delivered by someone at Hargrove. In at least 2 cases, they said the call had come from Diana Hargrove directly, designed to move my client relationships to Brandon Whitfield before I was even out the door. They had not just prepared a folder. They had been executing a transfer of my professional relationships for months before the meeting in Conference Room 12. The meeting had not been the beginning of the plan. It had been the closing ceremony. I sat with that information for 1 full day before I did anything with it. I sat with it in Loretta's back room with the coffee maker running, and Shirley Caesar singing, and the light coming through the small window above the shelf, and I allowed myself to understand the full shape of what had been done. Then I called Denise Crawford. Denise and I had been at Spelman together. She had gone to law school at Howard, built a practice in Atlanta specializing in employment law and commercial litigation, and had the particular quality of someone who became very quiet when they were very serious. She was 55 years old and had, over the course of her career, established a reputation for being methodical, thorough, and completely unmoved by attempts at intimidation. She answered on the second ring. I told her what I had. She told me to come in the next morning and bring everything. We worked together for 6 days. Denise and her associate, a sharp young woman named Angela, reviewed every document I had brought: the termination agreement, the 47-page review, the email thread showing Richard's approval of the Delaney negotiation, my performance reviews from every year, my salary history. What Denise found in the salary history was something I had suspected but never formally quantified. Over a 7-year period, 2016 through 2022, I had been paid an average of 23% less than my direct white male counterparts in equivalent senior director roles, producing equivalent or greater revenue. She pulled the comparison figures from industry salary surveys and cross-referenced them with the internal data I had retained. The gap was consistent, and it was documented. She also found, in the archived emails I had kept, 3 separate instances of Richard Hargrove discussing the EVP position in 2019, once in a reply to me suggesting I was the natural internal candidate, once in a separate email thread that Terry Nakamura had quietly forwarded to my personal account with no message attached, just the email, in which Richard wrote to a board member that he was not sure the EVP role was the right fit given Maya's style, a phrase that I recognized immediately as doing a great deal of work for a very small number of words. Denise set her pen down at the end of day 6 and looked at me across her conference table. "We can file tomorrow if you want," she said. "Federal and state. The salary discrimination alone is a strong case. Add the defamation, the medical leave story they told your clients, and we have something that would get serious attention." I looked at the table for a moment. "Not yet," I said. Denise nodded, as if she had been expecting this. "What are you waiting for?" I looked up at her. The right moment, and the right room. She smiled, small and precise. "All right," she said. "Then let's make sure everything is ready when you get there. There is one more thing that happened during those weeks of preparation, and it happened on a Wednesday evening when I was packing up the folding table at Loretta's for the night. My phone rang. An unfamiliar number. I answered. Maya. A voice I recognized, slightly hesitant. "This is Terry Nakamura," who had stood by the window in conference room 12 and looked at the Atlanta skyline while Richard Hargrove told me the company had outgrown me. I did not speak. I let her continue. "I need to tell you something," she said, "about the Meridian Tower deal." I sat back down at the folding table. The Meridian Tower project was the largest single development opportunity that had come into the Atlanta commercial real estate market in a decade. A 32-story mixed-use tower in Midtown, anchored by a major financial services tenant. The asset management contract for the full building, everything from leasing strategy to property management to investor relations, was estimated at over $140 million in managed assets over a 10-year period. Hargrove had been pursuing it for 2 years. I had done the initial relationship groundwork. I had attended the first 3 meetings with the development team. I had written the preliminary proposal. Then I had been walked out of the building with a folder of fabricated performance issues and a $47,000 check. "The decision maker is Carolyn Merritt," Terry said, "CEO of Merritt Capital. She's been asking about you. In the last meeting, she asked Richard directly where you were. He told her you had moved on voluntarily. She didn't say anything, but—" Terry paused. "I've been in rooms with Carolyn Merritt for 2 years. She says a lot with the things she doesn't say." "Carolyn Merritt," I said. I was already opening the folding table back up, reaching for a pen. I knew the name. I knew more than the name. In 2021, I had closed a preliminary leasing consultation with a property in Merritt Capital's smaller portfolio, a boutique office building in Buckhead. At the end of that engagement, I had written Carolyn Merritt a handwritten note on cream stationery. I had thanked her for the professional courtesy her team had extended throughout the process. I had said it had been a pleasure to work alongside people who understood that real estate relationships were long-term by nature. "Does she still have my note?" I asked Terry. A pause. Then, "That's exactly why she asked about you." I sat in the back room of Loretta's salon with the coffee maker cooling and Shirley Caesar quiet and the small window showing a square of dark Georgia sky. And I felt something move through me that was not quite triumph and not quite relief, but was something in between. The feeling of a line drawn between 2 points that had been separated by time and distance, and now suddenly connected. "Thank you, Terry," I said. "I should have said something," Terry replied. "In that room, I should have said something." I thought about how to answer that honestly. "You're saying something now," I said finally. "That counts." I added Carolyn Merritt's name to my list, and then I wrote a second note, in the margin, in my own handwriting. The right room, the right moment. I put my pen down. I looked at the folding table, at the 12-page market analysis, at the salary comparison documents, at Denise Crawford's careful legal architecture, at 60 names on a list that were 60 real human relationships, built one handwritten note at a time over 5 years of being the kind of professional that people actually remembered. The company had outgrown me. All right then, I thought. Let's see. The invitation arrived on a Thursday. It came in a cream envelope with the Merritt Capital logo embossed in the upper left corner, addressed to Maya Thompson, Thompson Commercial Properties. Inside, a formal card for the Meridian Tower, Annual Developer Gala, Friday, June 28th, the Georgian Terrace Hotel, Midtown Atlanta. Black tie optional. Cocktails at 7. Program at 8:30. I set it on the kitchen counter and looked at it for a long moment. The Georgian Terrace. I knew that building the way I knew most significant Atlanta properties. Its history, its architecture, its particular place in the city's memory. Built in 1911, Enrico Caruso had stayed there. The cast of Gone with the Wind had celebrated their premiere there in 1939. It had been restored twice and had survived everything the century threw at it, with its limestone facade intact and its lobby chandeliers still throwing light the same way they had for 100 years. It was a building that understood the long game. I had always appreciated that about it. I placed the invitation on the side table next to Raymond's chair, next to the notepad where I had written, "All right then," 106 days earlier. 106 days. I counted them because I am a person who counts things, not out of obsession, but because numbers are honest, and I have always preferred honesty to approximation. 106 days between the moment I walked out of conference room 12 and the moment I would walk into the Georgian Terrace Ballroom as the founder of Thompson Commercial Properties, invited by Gerald Washington, expected by Carolyn Merritt. I called Keisha that evening. It was time. I had told her pieces of the story over the past months, enough that she knew I had left Hargrove, that I was building something new, that things were moving in a direction I felt good about, but I had not told her the full shape of it. That evening, I did. She was quiet for most of it. Keisha is a physician, which means she has learned to receive difficult information without performing a reaction. She processes before she responds. When I finished, she was quiet for another few seconds. "Mom," she said. "Yes, baby. Are you okay?" "I'm better than okay. I mean, in March. Were you okay?" I thought about the 11 minutes in the bathroom, Raymond's chair, the dark living room. I had 11 minutes of not okay, I told her, and then I had a lot of work to do. She laughed, which was the sound I had been waiting for. "That is the most you thing I've ever heard. Your grandmother taught me." "I know she did." A pause. "Are you going to this gala?" "I am." "Then you need to call Loretta about what you're wearing." Loretta arrived at my house on the evening of June 28th at 4 o'clock, which was 3 hours before the event and entirely characteristic of Loretta, who believes that adequate preparation time is a moral virtue. She brought a small white box from the bakery she liked on Memorial Drive, 2 slices of lemon pound cake, because lemon pound cake was what we ate at Spellman when something important was happening, and a bottle of Prosecco that she set on the counter with the confidence of someone who has decided the occasion warrants it. She found me in the bedroom in the navy suit. "No," she said, simply without preamble, the way she had said it 44 years ago in an economics lecture when the professor said something incorrect about inflation, and Loretta had not raised her hand so much as simply stated the correction. "I know," I said. "I just needed to see it one more time." She understood that. Loretta always understood the things that needed no explanation. She sat on the edge of the bed while I changed, and we talked the way we had been talking for 4 decades. Not about the gala specifically, not about the strategy or the stakes, but about everything around it. About Dorothy, my mother, who had passed 4 years ago, and who I wished more than anything could have been alive for the past 106 days. About Raymond, who would have left a note in my coat pocket that morning that said something small and exactly right. About Keisha, who had sent me a voice message at noon that day that was just 30 seconds of her saying, "Go, Mama. Go, go, go." "She sounds like Raymond," Loretta said. "She does," I said. "She really does." The dress was black, meaty length, boat neck, clean lines. I had bought it 6 weeks earlier on a quiet Saturday, alone, without ceremony. Not for a specific occasion, I had not yet received the invitation, but because I had known, in the way that you know certain things without being able to explain them, that there would be an occasion and I needed to be ready for it. The shoes were a deep burgundy heel, what my mother used to call oxblood red, the color she wore on the days she said she had already won. My grandmother's gold earrings, small hoops, plain, warm. A clutch bag in brown leather that I had bought from an artisan in Savannah in 1998 and had used perhaps 15 times over 25 years because I saved it for the moments that deserved it. Loretta looked at me when I was dressed and was quiet for a moment, which from Loretta is the highest form of approval. "Well?" I said. "Like someone they should have never let walk out that door," she said. I held that sentence in my chest for a moment. Then I put on my grandmother's earrings and picked up my bag and we walked downstairs together, Loretta and I, through the house where I had raised Keisha and loved Raymond and survived everything that had needed surviving, and out into the warm Atlanta evening where the dogwoods were long past and the summer had settled in and the sky was doing that particular shade of gold it does in Georgia in late June just before the sun goes down, the color that always looks like something good is about to happen. I arrived at the Georgian Terrace at 7:15, not early, not late, exactly on time, which is different from both of those things and means something different. Early is anxious, late is performing. On time is, I have somewhere to be and I have arrived. The lobby was already full, 300 people, perhaps more. Developers, investors, architects, municipal officials, lenders, the full ecosystem of a city's commercial real estate world gathered in a room that smelled of cut flowers and good food, and the particular charged air of a room where significant business decisions would be made before the evening ended. I checked my coat. I accepted a glass of water from a passing tray. Not wine, not yet, because I wanted my mind clear and my attention sharp. I oriented myself in the room the way my father taught me to orient myself in any unfamiliar system. Find the structure first, then find where the current is running. I found Brandon Whitfield before he found me. He was standing near the bar on the east side of the room with two younger colleagues I did not recognize. He had a drink in his hand and the posture of someone who has recently been given something large and is still getting used to the weight of it. He was wearing a suit I recognized as expensive and recent. He was 34 years old and he was about to give a presentation, I had been told by Terry, on Hargrove's vision for the Meridian Tower Partnership. He looked up from his conversation and saw me. I watched it happen in real time. The recognition, the micro-freeze, the recalibration. His eyes went to the name badge on my lapel, small and white. Maya Thompson, Thompson Commercial Properties. I saw him read it. I saw him understand what it meant. His drink hand tightened slightly. I did not stop walking. I did not nod. I did not acknowledge the moment because the moment did not require my acknowledgement. It was happening regardless. I simply continued through the room at the pace of someone who had somewhere to be. Richard Hargrove was standing with a cluster of investors near the center of the room, doing what Richard did well in social settings, projecting the particular ease of a man who owns the space he is standing in. He was wearing a dark suit, and he was laughing at something someone had said, and he looked, from a distance, like a man who had not recently dismantled a 22-year career and replaced it with a 34-year-old who was currently frozen at the bar. He saw me at the same moment I looked at him. Across 30 feet of polished floor and 300 people, our eyes met for 2 seconds. His face did not change. He was too practiced for that. But something changed behind his face. A recalculation. A subtle shifting of whatever internal model he had been running about the current state of the situation. He did not come to speak to me. I did not go to speak to him. Diana Hargrove was nearby, and Diana was less practiced than Richard, or perhaps simply less motivated to hide what she felt. She followed Richard's line of sight to me, and I watched her eyes move to my badge with the same reading speed that Brandon's had, and I watched the same moment of understanding arrive in her face. And unlike Richard or Brandon, she did not look away. She held my gaze for a long moment, and what was in her expression was complex. There was calculation in it, and something that might have been the early form of a realization she had not been prepared to have this evening. I met her gaze for exactly as long as she held it, which was not long, and then I continued moving. Terry Nakamura was standing near the window on the far side of the room, alone for a moment, holding a glass of wine and looking out at the midtown skyline. She looked different outside the office, quieter somehow, or perhaps more herself. When she saw me, she did something I did not expect. She smiled. Not the careful smile of a professional managing a complicated situation, but a real one, full and unguarded. I crossed the room to her. "You look wonderful," she said quietly. "So do you," I said. "Thank you, Terry, for the call." She shook her head slightly as if dismissing the credit. "I should have said something in March." "You said something when it mattered most," I told her. "That's not nothing." She looked out at the skyline for a moment and then back at me. "She's here," she said. "Carolyn. She arrived about 20 minutes ago. She asked someone if you had arrived yet." I looked across the room. Carolyn Merritt was not a difficult person to find in a room, not because she was loud or prominent in the conventional sense, but because she had the quality of certain people who have spent a long time being absolutely certain of who they are. A settled stillness that draws the eye the way a fixed point draws the eye in a moving landscape. She was 61 years old, silver-haired with a cut that was precise and unadorned, wearing a deep green dress that was quietly perfect. She was speaking with two people I recognized as municipal infrastructure officials, and she was listening more than she was talking, which told me everything I needed to know about how she operated. She saw me before I reached her. She excused herself from the conversation, cleanly, without rush, and took 2 steps in my direction, meeting me halfway. She extended her hand. "Maya Thompson," she said, the way people say a name they have been looking forward to saying. "Ms. Merritt," I said. "It's good to finally meet you properly." She shook her head slightly, a small correction. "Carolyn, we're past formality, I think." She looked at me with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who bills her assessment time at rates that mean she does not waste it. "I got your note," she said. 2021, the Buckhead property. "I hoped it found you," I said. "It did. I still have it." She said this simply, as a fact. I keep notes that mean something. Yours meant something. A pause. I asked about you. "At the last Hargrove meeting, I heard." The answer I got didn't satisfy me. She looked at me steadily. So I asked Gerald Washington instead. "And what did Gerald tell you?" The corner of her mouth moved, almost imperceptibly. "He told me to wait for this evening. We talked for 22 minutes. I know because I was aware of the time the way you are aware of time when every minute of a conversation is building towards something. We talked about the Meridian Tower project, its scope, its complexity, its particular challenges around tenant mix and long-term asset strategy. We talked about the Atlanta market, about the 18-month analysis I had written, which Gerald had shared with her with my permission 2 weeks earlier. We talked about what a genuine long-term asset management partnership looked like versus the transactional version, and how rarely clients could find the former. She did not ask about Hargrove. I did not mention it. At the end of 22 minutes, she looked at me with that settled, unhurried attention and said, "I'll have my team reach out to yours Monday morning." She said it the way people like Carolyn Merritt say things, without decoration, without hedging, without any of the social padding that surrounds statements people are not sure they mean. She meant it. The deal was done in those 6 words, and we both knew it, and neither of us needed to make a scene of it. We shook hands again. She returned to her conversation. I stood for a moment in the middle of that room, the Georgian Terrace ballroom with its 100-year-old chandeliers throwing warm light across 300 people, and I breathed. Gerald Washington appeared at my elbow, as if he had been waiting for the right moment to materialize. "Well," he said quietly. "Monday morning," I said. He nodded once, with the satisfaction of a man who has placed a very considered bet and watched it land exactly where he expected. "Your mother would be proud," he said. He had never met my mother, but somehow this did not make the statement less true. She would have taken credit for all of it, I said. He laughed. A real laugh, the kind that surprises itself. "Good," he said. She'd have been right. At 8:30, the room was called to attention. The Meridian Tower Developer Gala had, as its centerpiece, the formal announcement of the asset management partnership for the project. This was the moment that the entire evening had been building toward. The reason the 300 people in the room were there, the pivot point around which all the preceding cocktail conversation had been orbiting. A moderator stepped to the podium at the front of the ballroom and introduced the program. A few brief remarks about the project, its scale, its significance for the Atlanta skyline, its role in the city's development vision for the decade ahead. Then he introduced Carolyn Merritt. She walked to the podium without notes. I was standing near the back of the room beside Gerald, with a clear sightline to the podium, and, less intentionally but unavoidably, to the Hargrove and Associates table directly to my left. Brandon Whitfield was seated, upright, with the careful stillness of someone bracing for something without knowing exactly what form it would take. Richard was beside him, hands folded on the table. Diana was on Richard's other side, and even from where I stood I could see the quality of her attention. Brittle, directed at the podium with the kind of focus that wants very much to be somewhere else. Carolyn Merritt looked out at the room for a moment before she spoke. A long, unhurried moment of a person who has never felt the need to fill silence with noise. The Meridian Tower project, she began, represents something that good cities need, not just good buildings, but the right stewardship of those buildings over time. We spent considerable time evaluating who we wanted to trust with that stewardship. We were not looking for the largest firm or the most prominent name. We were looking for the right person. She paused. After extensive evaluation, Merritt Capital is proud to announce our asset management partnership for the Meridian Tower project with Thompson Commercial Properties, founded by Maya Thompson. The room responded. A strong, warm wave of applause, the kind that carries within it not just acknowledgement, but curiosity, the sound of 300 people updating their understanding of the landscape. I walked to the front of the room. I want to describe what that walk felt like, because I think it matters. It was not triumphant, not in the way that movies make triumph look. There was no swelling music, no slow motion, no sense of finally, finally, finally. It felt quieter than that and more solid. It felt like the walk of a woman who had done the work, who had spent 106 days in a back room with a folding table and a coffee maker in her own hands, who had written 60 notes over 5 years and honored 60 relationships, and documented every email and kept every approval and trusted, quietly and stubbornly, that the things she had built were real and would hold. I reached the podium. Carolyn Merritt shook my hand and stepped aside. I looked out at the room. I found the Hargrove table first, not searching for it. It was simply where my eyes went, the way your eyes go to the place in a room that holds the most meaning. Richard Hargrove, looking at the tablecloth. Diana, with an expression I recognized as the face of someone swallowing something they cannot put down and cannot keep. Brandon Whitfield, young and well-dressed, staring at the podium with the particular blankness of someone whose internal model of the world has just been significantly revised. And at the window, standing slightly apart from the main tables, Terry Nakamura, looking directly at me, her eyes steady and clear. She gave the smallest possible nod, barely a movement, more an acknowledgement than a gesture, and I received it for what it was. I looked down at the podium for one moment, not because I needed notes, I had no notes, but because I was choosing carefully. My mother had taught me that the most important words are the ones you take time to select. Anyone can fill silence. The rare skill is knowing which words deserve the silence you are about to end. I looked up. I looked at the room, at Gerald Washington near the back, at Carolyn Merritt to my right, at 300 people who were about to hear whatever I chose to say. And I said, I've been in this room before. Last time I left early. A brief pause. Tonight I think I'll stay. That was all. 7 seconds, perhaps 8. 12 words. The room understood. Not all of it. Not everyone in that ballroom knew the specific geography of what those words meant, did not know about Conference Room 12 or the 47-page folder or the 5 words Richard Hargrove had used to describe 22 years of my life. But they felt the weight of it regardless, the way you feel the weight of a sentence that is carrying more than its words. The applause that followed was longer than the applause for the announcement. Warmer, the kind that has something personal in it, even from strangers. I stepped back from the podium. Carolyn Merritt leaned toward me slightly and said so quietly that only I could hear, "Perfect." I did not look at the Hargrove table again. There was no need to. I had not said those words for Richard or Diana or Brandon. I had not said them to wound or to declare victory or to make any person in that room feel small. I had said them because they were true. I had been in that room before, in the sense that I had been in every room like it for 22 years, present but not fully acknowledged, building something on behalf of a structure that had not ultimately been able to see what it had. And now I was back, not on their terms, on mine. I had earned that sentence, every word of it. I drove home that night the same way I had driven away from Hargrove 106 days earlier. Peachtree Road, the highway, exit 32. The city quiet now, after midnight. The streets belonging to the people who work in the dark hours that most of us sleep through. I did not put music on. I drove in the silence and let the evening settle around me, the way you let a good meal settle, not rushing past it toward whatever comes next, but staying in it for a moment, honoring what it was. At home, I changed out of the black dress and hung it carefully, put my grandmother's earrings back in the small dish on the dresser where they lived, made a cup of chamomile tea, sat in Raymond's chair, in the dark, in the same position I had sat in 106 days ago with a 47-page folder on my lap and the particular quality of silence that surrounds a life that has just been broken open. The folder was gone now, filed with Denise Crawford, who had everything she needed and was waiting, patiently and precisely, for whatever I decided to do with it. There was time for that. The work of justice is long, and I had learned not to rush the things that deserve to be done properly. I reached into the side table drawer. I took out the piece of notepad paper. All right, then. I turned it over. On the back, in my handwriting, from the night after I had spoken to Terry Nakamura in Loretta's back room. The right room, the right moment. I looked at it for a while. Then I took my pen and wrote one word below the other two lines. Done. I want to tell you one thing before I go, because I think it is the thing that matters most. I am not telling this story because I won. I am telling it because of what I learned about the difference between working hard and working with your eyes open. For 22 years, I believed that excellence was self-evident, that results would speak clearly enough that I would not have to, that if I simply kept doing the work, if I closed the deals, developed the relationships, delivered the numbers, absorbed the slights and the inequities and the underpayments and the stolen promotions and kept going, the institution would eventually catch up to what I had built. It did not. And I do not say that with bitterness. I say it as information, clearly and directly, the way my father read an electrical panel before he touched it. Institutions do not automatically correct themselves. Systems do not self-repair out of gratitude or conscience. The things you build in silence are real, and they are yours, and they will hold. But you have to be willing, when the time comes, to claim them out loud. You have to be willing to walk into the room and stay. My mother used to braid my hair every morning and say the same sentence in my ear like a fact she was making sure I memorized. I spent 63 years learning what it fully meant. Baby, you walk in a room, you own it. Not because they gave it to you, because you built it. She was right. She was right the whole time. The company has outgrown you, Maya. That was the last time I said nothing.